Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. Mysteries have always been one of my favorite things ever since I was a kid. I love detective stories. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love the hard-boiled detectives. I love the crazy sort of confusing detectives, the average man detectives. There's all kinds of detective stories even Western detective stories I enjoyed. And again, as I said, mysteries became just one of my favorite things. And here I am, much older than a kid anymore. And I still found that my favorite stories to read and to write were mysteries. And so when I look at how to construct them, and I've written quite a few, when I look at how to construct them, I realize there's certain common denominators, especially when you're creating characters. Now, first off, your basic common denominator characters. You have a victim, you have a villain, you have a sleuth, and you have suspects. Not necessarily in that order. But those are your sort of your common four, right? And then you have to ask yourself certain common denominator questions like, okay, who is the victim or the villain or the sleuth or the suspect? What is the MacGuffin? What is the thing that everybody's functioning to try and get or destroy or hide or steal, blah, blah, blah. Why? What makes that thing or that MacGuffin important to the victim, the villain, the suspects, or the sleuth, right? And then where is it taking place? Because the setting or the backdrop affects the tone and feel and pacing of the story. Then how? How did the villain do the crime? How did it affect the victim? How were the suspects involved or not involved? To what degree? And how does your detective figure it out? Right. And then you have motives. Because, yes, we all do things for certain reasons, but in a mystery story, you need to understand the motives because A, the motive is the powerful source or the powerful drive for your villain to commit the crime, right? The motive is something that you're going to look for, maybe more than one, when you start trying to eliminate your suspects and hone in on your actual culprit. The more motive that a person has, the possibilities increase that they are the one who did the deed. Now, you can play tricks with that, but that is sort of a common way of moving through the story, right? So you have motives like greed or fear. So if someone's done something and they're afraid they're going to be discovered or it's going to be released to the public and that's going to destroy their reputation, their livelihood or whatever. There's always revenge. Boy, that's one that's used to death, pun intended. So there's certain common motives that you will find in many of the TV shows, movies, books, comics, and everything that you ingest, right? And then you have the common denominator action and reaction. So there's confusion, there's desperation, there's anger, and some of those things lead to your mistakes or the villain making mistakes, which then the sleuth picks up on those mistakes or a mistake, which leads them to determine that is a clue, which leads them to then figuring out who did it. So those common denominators are 99% of the time in any mystery story that you find. How they're used, how many individuals are involved, those are the things that determine the structure of the story and more often than not really help to identify the audience that is intended for that story. The cozy mysteries will not pull the same audience as the hard-boiled detective stories, or the Sherlock Holmes stories may not pull the same type of audience as perhaps the CSI or the Law and Order group. It depends. Some crossovers do occur, but you need to identify what kind of story are you doing? What kind of tone do you want? And then develop your characters to fit that world. Yes, sometimes it's the reverse. You have the characters and you create the world around them. But either way, you want them to blend. You want them to make sense, right? So it's victim, villain, suspects, sleuth, right? Those are your common characters. Who, what, why, where, how. Those are your common questions. Greed, fear, revenge. Those are your common motives, and your common actions and reactions can be confusion, desperation, anger, which could lead to mistakes. All right. That's enough for now for you to chew on. And if you want more information, look for my next installment of Simmons Says.